All right, well, hello, Bio 16. I am going to make a recording today for you on Chapter 20, the blood. And I don't have a video going because my camera's not behaving, but you don't need to see me to get the content. Anyway, so the blood is a connective tissue that circulates through the cardiovascular system. And so this is a part of why this is called a connective tissue. First of all, it connects the organ systems of the body. It helps to absorb food. It helps to move nutrients and wastes around to allow, removal of content. There's gas exchange that occurs. And I was talking about the waste excretion here. So basically what's happening, excuse me, is the cardiovascular system moves this connective tissue, the blood, around to distribute waste, nutrients, and gases through the body. So the function of blood is to, like I said, distribute the nutrients, oxygen, but also hormones that are secreted by specific endocrine tissues, which we talked about in Unit 3. Blood takes metabolic waste to the kidneys for excretion, and so this is one of the places in the body where waste is removed. However, we also have waste, carbon dioxide, that's being transported to the lungs. That's where carbon dioxide is released through the lungs. There are specialized cells, white blood cells, that help defend us against infection and disease. We'll be talking about those in more detail in a little bit. Blood does help us regulate our body pH, big time. Body pH is a big deal. In physiology, you're going to talk a lot about that. Blood pH allows enzymes in the body to work appropriately. Blood also allows us to maintain our body temperature. Have you ever flushed when you are running or exercising? That flush response is allowing your body to eliminate heat while you're moving around. Blood allows us to prevent fluid loss. When our blood vessels become damaged, basically blood will start to clot. Again, in physiology, you'll talk about the clotting pathway, but we'll talk about that a little bit here. And basically, all of these functions of blood are essential for us to survive. Otherwise, if we did not have the movement of hormones and oxygen and nutrients throughout the body, we would basically die within a matter of minutes because the tissues could not survive without nutrients and oxygen and the removal of waste products. So what we're going to be talking about today is, let me change my pointer here to a pen. We're going to be talking about the two main elements of blood, the plasma. So remember, plasma is the stuff that's supporting our formed elements. The formed elements are the cellular elements. So those are going to be the platelets, the white blood cells, and the red blood cells. And most of our blood is made up of red blood cells, or at least most of our formed elements. In terms of plasma, we have lots of proteins, or albumins. You'll see up here you have lots of albumins. What the albumins are doing is keeping water in the blood, and you'll talk about that a lot in physiology. We have other solutes. The other solutes will be things like salts, things like fatty acids, ATP, some waste, and blood is mostly, in terms of, or at least the plasma part, is mostly water. Water is going to be what's moving all of these other proteins and solutes around. So remember, the albumins are important for keeping water in the bloodstream. We have globulins, which usually serve an immune function, so that's a part of our immune system. Fibrinogen helps in clotting, and then other enzymes and hormones are going to be other things dissolved in the blood. In terms of our formed elements down here, we have a set of white blood cells, the neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, lymphocytes, and monocytes. The types of cells that are most often found in terms of white blood cells would be the neutrophils. The neutrophils occur at the highest density. The fewest are going to be the basophils. We'll talk about a little bit about what each of these do in a little bit. Now, platelets up here. Platelets are little formed elements. They're cellular fragments that help make a blood clot when you get cut. So platelets form the platelet plug to help seal up a damaged blood vessel. And then, of course, the ever famous red blood cells here. Red blood cells are designed to move oxygen through your body. Red blood cells shed their nuclei before they exit into general circulation through the bone marrow. And so red blood cells do not have a nucleus. In mammals, in birds, in fish, reptiles, and amphibians, they actually have nucleated red blood cells, which is kind of interesting. Why is it important to shed a nucleus? Well, one of the things about a red blood cell is this center is a bit concave. That concavity allows better gas transport or transport of oxygen through the bloodstream, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So just looking at this, plasma is the liquid matrix of blood. So remember, all connective tissues have a matrix, and blood has a liquid matrix. That liquid matrix, again, is a lot of water plus dissolved proteins and other solutes like waste, hormones, and salts. The formed elements we just reviewed: blood cells, cellular fragments that are suspended in the plasma. And so our red blood cells transport oxygen, somewhat CO2. I'm going to put a zigzag here. That means sort of. CO2 usually is dissolved in the plasma. You'll talk about that more in detail in physiology. The white blood cells are a part of our immune system, and then again, the platelets are small fragments of cells that have lots of enzymes in them, but they're essential for blood clotting. And so this is just a close-up so that you could see a better view of the types of electrolytes: sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride. Remember, all of these cations can join with chloride. We have organic nutrients like our ATP here, and organic wastes. So in terms of plasma, again, blood plasma is mostly water, proteins, and dissolved solutes. The proteins are important to maintain water in the blood. Proteins actually help thicken the blood. Proteins can be antibodies. These are our natural antibodies that our immune system makes for us to keep us safe from infecting pathogens. But some proteins are important for clotting. Each one of these jobs, clotting, immune defense, and blood thickening or blood liquid maintenance, all have a different set of proteins. You can go back to an earlier slide to look at those. The ions, mostly salts, nutrients, waste products. The waste products would be things like urea, ADP, gases, CO2 and oxygen, hormones, and other chemicals that you'll find in the blood, which you'll talk about in physiology, float around through the blood plasma. And then serum. One of the most important clotting factors is going to be fibrinogen. Fibrinogen gets converted to fibrin when it hits oxygen, and that allows the formation of a platelet plug or clot after you get cut to help seal up bleeding. Again, serum has lots and lots of antibodies to help keep us well. So what's going on in terms of plasma? Well, one of the things that I really like to always remember is water that we drink. All right, so water comes in through our digestive system. Water is absorbed into the blood. I'm sorry, I'm trying to use my mouse to write. In the blood, this is going to be plasma, right? So, as it circulates around, it's going to leave capillary beds and become interstitial fluid. So IF. Interstitial fluid, as you recall, is that liquidy, salty fluid that surrounds all the cells in tissues of the body. This is what helps keep us hydrated. So one of the big differences between plasma and interstitial fluid are the constituents, the proteins, the salts. So oxygen, and the gases actually, oxygen is higher in plasma. CO2 is higher in interstitial fluids. Why is that? Because the cells, so let's pretend that all these really poorly drawn circles are cells. All these little cells are releasing carbon dioxide as a consequence of their cellular metabolism. CO2 is going to be high in tissues. I think I need to get a pen. Then you have blood plasma here, and then you have the GI tract here where you drink water, right? So water comes in, goes through the plasma, goes out to your tissues. That's supposed to be CO2. My apologies, you guys. I'm trying here. Let's try to make this look like a tissue. Wow, it looks even worse. So anyways, the plasma is going to contain a whole lot of proteins and nutrients that will be transported into the tissues. The tissues then release carbon dioxide and other byproducts that can be reabsorbed out into the blood. So let's look at what's happening here. Let's get a different color of a pen, shall we? So I want to get a different color. Sorry, I'm still trying to work this out here, folks. So CO2 goes back into the bloodstream, circulates around, and gets released out in the lungs. So here's a great example. Pointer options, ink color. Oh, so sorry, folks. All right. I'm sorry, I really do need to get better at this. So within the blood, you have oxygen. Oxygen goes out into the tissues along with liquid, with plasma, into the interstitial fluid. That's supposed to be an arrowhead. Nourishes the tissues, and then CO2 is released. So when we're looking at the formed elements, again, here are our red blood cells. We'll talk about the white blood cells in a little bit. So most of our formed elements are going to be red blood cells. 99% of formed elements are red blood cells. White blood cells, if we come back here, you'll see is only about 0.1%, and that's shared with the platelets. So there are very few white blood cells and platelets around in any given volume of blood. So this is 0.1%. That's like very, very little, but that's all you need to keep you well. Isn't that amazing? There are two major classes of white blood cells. They're called granulocytes, or granular, or agranulocytes, or they're agranular. Granules are the appearance of these like little blobs inside of the cells after you stain them. So the study of histology has identified differences in similarities among tissues and cells based on using specific dyes and stains. So you take a sample of blood, you put like a purple dye on it, and things that have lots of little purple dots. So let's pretend you have a cell. All right, and let's come over here and try to make a granulocyte. A granulocyte would have lots of purple dots inside of it, lots and lots of them. There's a pink dye that you use as well, and you'll see this in a little bit. The agranulocytes, I'm going to just make a purple cell because honestly the cell would be staining purple on the outside, have very few purple dots, hence agranular. So blood, for the most part, or at least white blood cells, are going to be either granular or agranular. The platelets, they don't really have much granulations to them. They're just fragments. So our formed elements, the other formed element that we're always very familiar with and always talking about is going to be our erythrocytes. Erythrocytes are red blood cells. So you might as well just get used to saying erythrocyte. They are thicker at the edges, thin in the center because they've shed their nucleus. Because they don't have a nucleus, that means that they rely on fermentation to survive. They are living cells. They don't have a lot of organelles. They don't have a whole lot of like Golgi and things like that. They do live normally about 120 days unless somebody has a genetic condition. But that removal of the nucleus and organelles gives you more space for more hemoglobin. So erythropoiesis is the process by which more red blood cells are born in the red bone marrow. Guess why it looks red? Because there's lots of red bone marrow cells in there. About 3 million red blood cells are made every second in your life to restore those that are lost. Now, how are you losing them? Many of them go away or destroyed in your spleen. And that's just a consequence of them surviving for a long time after 120 days. And so the spleen will remove red blood cells, and the hematopoietic stem cells will restore them. So the hematocrit itself is a measure of how many red blood cells you have. So it's the percent of blood that is made up of red blood cells. So if you have 10 mils, it's the percentage of that 10 mils that's made up of red blood cells. In women, it's usually about 40%. In men, it's slightly higher. If you have a low percentage, 37%, that indicates that you have anemia. All right, so we're about to stop this recording. We will be moving on with part 2 in just a minute.